Well, I guess my cat thinks it's time to start, so I think we will start. Welcome, everyone. This is the third of the Eastside Progressive Summer Series of educational forums. This evening, we have as a presenter Ingrid Rothe. She is a longtime Madison resident, and she's worked for the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development and is retired from the Institute for Research on Poverty at the UW-Madison. She's a former co-chair of the League of Women Voters of Dane County, and currently she's the chair of the Legislative Committee of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin and co-chair of the Dane County Voter ID Coalition. We'd like to welcome her to give this presentation this evening on current things going on about voter suppression and what we can do to fight voter suppression in Wisconsin and throughout the country. So with that, I'd like to thank Ingrid and welcome her to begin.
Thanks very much, Arden. And thanks to all the rest of you for this opportunity. I hope to have a conversation about how we can move forward in these very challenging times. So I am just wanted us all to focus on what our goal is, which is we are trying to make it possible for more people who intend to vote and have their vote counted. And oops, let's see if I know how to go backwards here. I also wanted to, so pardon me with I am having a hard time here working both the PowerPoint and the Zoom apparently, but so please bear with me. But I also thought it would be useful to reflect on the environment that we're working in now. And a very important thing, which I think we need to reflect more on, is the massive amounts of disinformation about voting and the security of our elections that are floating around out there. And I think and also following that, uncertainty about whether every vote counts and whether there is in fact extensive fraud or outside interference. And by and large, of course, I believe that our voting system is basically sound. Of course, it can always be improved in terms of expanding voter access, but I am not concerned that there is massive fraud or that there's outside interference. Nevertheless, that is what there are a lot of people of goodwill who have heard this and are have concerns about it. We also face right now the lack of interest, at least traditionally, in the upcoming spring nonpartisan election. We have our next elections are February 15th and April 5th. But I wanted to point out that even in the November 2020 election, which was a very high turnout election, the city clerk, Madison city clerk, estimated that 25% of all eligible to vote residents in Madison did not vote. And that's sort of a big number. And I think in all that work that many of us have done to try and help people to vote, we haven't really concerned ourselves with those people who think it's not worth voting, because we were so focused on trying to adjust to the new rules about how to help people who do want to vote get there. And then of course we still have COVID, which may have other kinds of direct impacts on us. For instance, we have a potentially very large number of evictions, possibly this fall, for those folks who are unfortunate enough to be evicted in addition to all the other problems they face, this will create problems for them in terms of how they can vote. And finally, we get to the subject for which I was invited to speak, changing election laws on both the state and federal level. And I actually put that last in my list of the environment, because I think right now that is the least, or my personal opinion is that's the least of our problems right now, with possibly a few exceptions. So I'm hoping that we can have a sort of informal discussion as I go on, and I'd be happy to hear pushback if you don't agree with me. But let me just start with how things are at the state level. So you and I together have lived through massive changes in election administration laws starting about 8 years ago. And I feel like for me personally, it's taken me about 8 years to get to the point where I feel comfortable now understanding what our options are and how to strategize about helping voters get access. And in a sense, that made me want to start looking around to see what we're doing with regard to those other 25% of the voters. And of course, the non-voters in the upcoming spring election, we expect to be a much higher percentage. But I don't actually anticipate, although things could change on a dime, but as of yesterday or today, very many law changes for the next election. Of course, you all know that there have been very large efforts, both here and I would say largely in the other swing states, to make major changes to restrict voter access, focusing on, for instance, how you return absentee ballots, what you have to do in order to get an absentee ballot, and on and on. Now, not all these bills have passed our Wisconsin legislature yet. We've had a lot of bills introduced. The ones that have passed have been vetoed by Governor Evers, and I expect this to continue. So I don't expect to see big changes in the law in regards to election administration. Similarly, I think efforts to expand voter access will probably not come out of the legislature at all. There are now some bills in the legislature that are designed to expand voter access, and some of them that we might contemplate supporting have to do with helping high school students, making it easier for high school students to vote, permitting them to vote at the age of 17 in primaries, and providing additional education for them. It's very interesting to me that these particular bills, which we certainly would otherwise support, are still sort of in draft form and need to be amended, and actually appear somewhat sloppily drafted in at least one case. And what that says to me is that those proponents who we'd like to support, who are in favor of expanding voter access, don't think anything will happen with those bills, and so they're not going to spend a lot of time trying to make sure they read exactly right. Another thing that, of course, is going to affect us all is that we're starting, the redistricting process has started, certainly started, we're looking at a very compressed cycle for local municipalities to do their own redistricting, because they don't expect to get the census data until September 1st. And then, of course, the legislature will chime in, and the People's Commission has also been working very hard over this last period of time. And another thing related to existing laws is that 205,000 voter registrations were purged in a standard process I don't regard this as a terrible thing. I mean, this, most of these people either have moved and therefore need to re-register anyway, if they still live here in the state, or they have not voted in the last 4 years. So by state law, they would need to re-register. But it does create, again, a question of what do voters know about their own voting? What do they know in general about what's happening with the voting systems in Wisconsin? For instance, this might be the purge of 205,000 voter registrations could be construed as a good thing. It demonstrates that our state is interested in trying to keep the registration rolls up to date and accurate. And some steps have been taken to try to minimize the number of people who will be purged by mistake. And so in one sense, this is evidence of how we manage to keep things moving accurately. Arden?
I should have asked if you would like questions intermixed or, but I had a question about the purging of the voter rolls, if that's okay.
Sure, questions anytime are fine. I'm sorry, I should have said that.
No, I should have asked. So is 4 years a typical time period for which, if there's no voter activity, most states would be purging voter rolls? I thought 8 years was more typical, but is 4 customary?
I don't actually know the answer to that. It's been 4 years in Wisconsin for quite a while. Does somebody else know what other states do? I don't, I'm sorry, I don't know what other states do. So we'll try and look that up and consider that. So let me move on. At the federal level.
Excuse me, I'm not clear on this about asking questions. Can we ask questions right now?
Sure.
Okay, before we go on to federal law proposals, let's back up to what we were just talking about. Even if 4 years is common in other states, that doesn't mean it's good. That doesn't mean that that's what we should be doing. There's a lot of people that don't vote every single election, but do vote every 8 years or something like that. So, unless somebody has some hard facts on that, I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. And second of all, that voter registration scraping, last time they did that,
they do it every 2 years.
Well, the last time they did it, 72% of those that they scraped were still valid. So again, I think
not in Wisconsin. That was not true in Wisconsin.
Okay, well, I guess I'll have to let that slide because I can't say exactly where that was, whether it was here or somewhere else.
For sure, you're right. There are people who intend to vote and still live at the same address who are eliminated in this process. But a huge majority, perhaps 80% of the people on this list did actually move and need to re-register. So that is the principal reason why they are being, and I know that because 2 years ago, we were part of an effort to call this entire list, which we did. And we identified relatively few people who were about to be purged by mistake. And so we were able to alert them that they needed to contact their clerk. For some reason or another, they didn't get the postcard or they misplaced it. But there is an issue then of how do you maintain an accurate list? And all I'm proposing, you may be right that 4 years is too short. I actually don't have an opinion, but I do think some period of time is probably a good idea.
And what is wrong with having some people that have voted on there, even if they're not voting? What is the harm there?
Well, the principal harm, at least from the point of view of people who want to cry fraud, is that it may make it easier for those names and addresses, which are mostly no longer valid. Those people mostly don't live at that address anymore, for someone else to take advantage of that registration, which is no longer a valid registration.
Mm. Okay, well, I'll leave it there, but I'm not sure I agree with all of that. Okay,
Well,
thank you.
I'm happy to, I mean, these are good points. So we should all be thinking exactly as you are about what's the best thing we can do to help people who want to vote. But let me move on to the federal proposals.
I'm sorry, there's just one last question about
Sure.
voter purging. Was the 205,000 years, 205,000 voters that were purged comparable to the amount that have been purged at other times when the list has been cleansed, so to speak?
Yeah, this is, the last 2 years ago was also around 200,000. It has been in recent times down as low as 100,000. I don't think we've risen. I think I remember seeing one year about 300,000.
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting perspective. I think we'll move on to a new topic. Maybe if there are additional questions about voter purging, we can save them for the end.
Okay, thanks. So on the federal level, I'm sure you've heard about this, are two bills, both of which have passed the House and but not the Senate. So the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is a bill which essentially restores the protections of the original Voting Rights Act of 1965 and also establishes a mechanism for sort of expanding those protections nationwide to areas that weren't initially identified in the original law. And then the second one is the For the People Act, which has been designated this year as House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1, which presumably means it's very important to the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader. Does all kinds of good things, makes it easier to vote in federal elections, ends gerrymandering, overhauls federal campaign finance laws, increases. Well, you can read that for yourself, although I think there's a misspelled word there. In general, makes voting in federal elections easier and more secure. And both of those bills, as I said, have not passed the Senate. I really can't prognosticate on how likely it is that they might pass, because I believe the Senate would have to eliminate the filibuster in order to pass either one of these. So it would be wonderful if they could be passed, and you will see a lot of action, efforts trying to persuade the Congress to take this up. We've already had one rally here in Madison. I'm sure there will be more. So a critical thing to do, which you are all on top of this anyway, but just in case you needed to see it in one place, here are some sources. I do think the clerks, many municipal clerks, will be making sort of minor tweaks to try and improve the efficiency of their operation, perhaps especially with respect to absentee voting. I did think for a while that a bill that would permit the clerks to begin counting absentee votes on the day before the election might pass, and perhaps it still will. But the other kinds of tweaks are not likely to affect of what a voter sees about voting, but more likely just to try and make it easier for them, for the clerks, to accomplish what they need to do to maintain the elections. But of course, the Madison Clerk's Office is the #1 source for information. The Wisconsin Election Commission, which also maintains My Vote and Bring It on the web. Those are two big places where you can get information. The League of Women Voters of Dane County has lots of information on voting, and the Voter ID Coalition. We do a number of things, including maintaining a calendar where we're looking for volunteers to help us assist voters. And you can use that calendar to sign up if you're inclined to step outside the east side, or to add your own events to the calendar if you're looking for volunteers outside your own membership. Oops, I didn't mean to go to the city clerk's office there. I apparently clicked on that. Oh gosh, here's where I get lost with Zoom.
You can use the slider on the left-hand side of your PowerPoint presentation to go down to another slide.
I can no longer see my PowerPoint presentation as part of my problem. Let me see if I can get rid of the clerk here. There we go. So what I really would like to talk with you all about is how can we, I think, I mean, you all already have very good expertise in how to assist people to register, how to assist people to get an ID if they need one, how to help them get to the polls if they need help. So I'd like for us to think about ways to talk to people about how important it is to vote in general. It would be nice if we could engage enough people for the February and April elections so that we get them registered, so that we're not focused on trying to register a huge number of people just before the November election. But people aren't that interested in the nonpartisan elections in the spring. So I've been trying to talk to people about what's the best thing we can do to approach folks who aren't already convinced that they should vote. And these are all things you've heard before. I do think that, at least in my conversations with voters, there is so much misinformation out there. In particular, more people than I've ever heard before are saying to me, my vote won't count anyway. For a variety of reasons. One, because there's a lot of fraud and people who are voting who shouldn't vote. And these are not sort of the true believers. These are sort of ordinary people who are worried about what they see. And so I think and what they hear, I think a lot of damage has been done by all this talk about the whole system is rife with fraud. And I think that we need to consider whether part of our job in assisting voters is to help counter that kind of reaction to all the misinformation that's out there. And of course, I am also very big on working in coalition and would like to encourage all of you to join the Voter ID Coalition. And of course, you already know this, I'm sure, for, you have different ways of working with different populations. I did suggest to Joe, who asked me about what can be done about locked apartment buildings. And my response to that is, the thing I would try next is just standing outside the apartment building, trying to find somebody who lives there, who's willing to assist you, who by distributing literature or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, or by even organizing some kind of registration event, if it might be possible to go forward, if a resident of the building organized it. So that's one possible option. We are in the coalition, I hope, planning to go back to doing more canvassing this year. Although, of course, the Delta variant is throwing wrenches into the works. But there is some research that shows that pledge cards do work, although most of the research is done with younger people, especially students. But so I'd like to get a sense from you of whether you think this is something we need to focus on, or if you think really if we just keep on standing with our clipboards at public events, offering to help people fill out registration forms, if that's adequate by itself to engage people. So I'll let you think about.
There
Yeah.
is one comment about sending letters to voters.
Mhm.
Do you think that it's useful to like take, I assume that this means like taking people who are on the registration, the voter registration lists, and sending postcards and letters to them, reminding them to vote?
I think the more ways you can put in front of a voter or a potential voter that there is an election, and it does require that they do some work in order to be able to vote, the better. And if you can do personalized or even not personalized letters. I think the primary reason why people who should not be purged are purged in these biennial purges is that they threw away the postcard that they got saying that they must contact the clerk.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, and partly that's, if there aren't any elections, you get a letter from the clerk and if she's not threatening you with a fine, you throw it away. So if there was more focus on, these things go on, you have to do a little work here to maintain your registration, to make sure you still have a valid ID. So yes, I think anything we can do to talk about how important elections are to the existence of our democracy.
The pandemic prompted me to become a poll worker for the first time, and I participated and helped with the Democracy in the Park events in Madison. And I thought that was really novel and got a lot of attention. And I wish I could think of more ways to find public spaces to engage people with in like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was a wonderful series of events arranged by the clerk. And I agree with you, it did a lot to raise attention to the issue of you have to get, if you're concerned about COVID, you have to and you don't want to go to the polls, you have to get a ballot. And how do you get one? And then what do you do with it?
Yeah. There's another comment from Gretchen about going to places where you can reach underrepresented people and getting to community centers and food pantries and so on. And it just seems like there's a limitation on how many different venues you can readily table or at and so on.
Prior to COVID, the calendar of on the Voter ID Coalition website, which also had links to how you could volunteer, especially in nice weather, really had probably 10 events a week where somebody was going to be tabling. And we were probably organizing about 400 volunteers to go to all these different events.
That's
And that-
fantastic. So like, what kinds of events that we haven't talked about so far? Do you mean like neighborhood fairs and things, or you
Right.
know, what kind of?
And just things like setting up tables in front of grocery stores. Now, a lot of these have gone away, of course, because of COVID, and just in other kinds of public events. I mean, we just had a number of celebrations. We had Juneteenth. We had Unity Day at the Urban League. And it's pre-COVID, there were more of these things going on. And now we don't, I mean, they're starting to come back, and that's good. But I think maybe we're going to have to start, doing more with grocery stores or other public places where people travel to. The libraries have always been a great ally of this effort, and somebody just told me that the libraries have started to shut down again, or at least some libraries. We do have contacts with most of the food banks in Dane County, and I would say about half of them, or maybe even 3/4 of them, did not want to have tabling going on during COVID, but they're starting to loosen up a little bit now. So the best we were able to do was to print things that could be put in the baskets and bags for the people who were there. So there's no doubt that COVID has made it more difficult for us to connect with people, and more difficult for us to have the kind of conversations I'm trying to promote. And because people don't want to talk to a stranger for very long, certainly not more than a few minutes, probably. But I would encourage you, if you organize events too, if you are welcome to contact the coalition and have us put it on our calendar if you're looking for volunteers outside your own membership. We also have ongoing projects. The Dane County League has ongoing projects to work with apartment dwellers, high school students, and other groups. And we are happy to have people join us there. The other thing, just so you may be aware of this already, but the Voter ID Coalition maintains this voter assistance helpline, which actually is advertised statewide. But we try to put people who call in from outside Dane County in touch with our contacts throughout the state. But probably 50% of the calls that we get, we can answer over the phone, the questions of the voter, regardless of where the voter resides. And probably about 50 or 60% of our calls come from Dane County. We can also arrange free transportation via Union Cab to the DMV. And if you have a voter that you want to arrange that for, you can do that by calling the helpline. So that's about all I know. I still don't know why my camera doesn't come on, but I will stop sharing.
It looks like we have two more questions that have come in through chat.
Okay.
The first one is the League of Women Voters still going to register students at UW at the bus pass site?
Not yet. Right now, the campus won't let non-students into buildings. Now, we were hoping that that would actually change before the bus pass distribution. Now with the Delta variant, I don't know. But right as of today, we could not go into a campus building.
I know that I work at Madison College, and I know that they're advertising for students to apply for positions doing voter engagement with other students.
That's great.
Yeah. And then the second question is, do you have any suggestions for access to bilingual volunteers or events with non-English speakers?
So I would connect with the organizations that represent those non-English speakers. So Centro Hispano, Voces de la Frontera, which has been very active in voting issues.
Mm-hmm.
There are several Hmong organizations that are interested in voting issues, including at I've forgotten the name of it, but at the
Hmong Community Center.
yeah, that's probably as good as any in the Bayview, is that where it's located, the one you're thinking of? Because I think there are two. Anyway, there is a Hmong community group in Bayview. We do have, we can answer calls in Spanish on the hotline, on the helpline. And closer to the election, we'll hire a translation service so we can get more languages, but we didn't get very many languages prior to the 2020 election, primarily Spanish, then a few, Russian actually was the second biggest.
Mm-hmm. I know people in other states who actually do voter registration outside the federal courts that do naturalization to grant citizenship to new immigrants. Are there naturalization proceedings in Madison, or is that something that might only happen in Milwaukee?
Right now, that only happens in Milwaukee. That's been, I think, true for the last 8 years or so. And there are the League of Women Voters of Milwaukee attends those ceremonies and assists people to register to vote. I'm sure, I don't think they plan to bring that back to Madison.
Okay. We have another question saying, did Evers veto Republican attempts to eliminate drop boxes, or have the Republicans' attempts not come to fruition yet?
I don't think that bill got to Evers. It's interesting to me, and I don't understand the politics of this very well, but not all these bills have come to the floor of the assembly yet. And even though there are all these many bad bills that you've read about, and I think that there is some pushback in the Republican caucus against some of them, which is why they are sort of still I think there is some effort to amend them somehow by the Republicans. So they haven't moved forward yet. We still have plenty of time for them to move forward though. So we have to be at least alert to this, but I expect if that bill or others like it were to come to Evers' desk, he would veto them. However, I expect that in the instance of should Evers not be reelected, that we will see all of these bills back again on the first day of the next available legislative session.
May I ask a question, Ingrid? This is Joe Mercurio. Hi, welcome and thank you for being here. We talked about, or you mentioned to me that part of the problem with getting the John Lewis Act and the Fair Voting Act through had to do with the filibuster. That the filibuster is largely in the way of getting those bills passed. Could you just speak about that a little bit?
Yes,
If I understood you correctly.
I'll do my best. So my understanding is that at least on the For the People Act, there's no Republican support. I think there is some small Republican support for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, but fewer than 10 Republicans. So that, and you need 60 votes in order to move any legislation forward, except possibly things related to the budget, which have a reconciliation avenue. So that's the filibuster essentially, that prevents those bills from moving forward. They've both passed the House. I read very differing things about whether the president and others are willing to give up the filibuster in order to pass these bills. And I cannot prognosticate how it might turn out. There are some other efforts involving Joe Manchin, who has publicly stated that he's not willing to eliminate the filibuster. So there's a Democrat who would be unwilling to vote with the Democrats. But he has said that he's willing to consider changes in the filibuster. For instance, requiring people who wish to filibuster to actually do it like we used to do it, you know, when Jimmy Stewart was making movies, and make them actually speak until they're exhausted. But I think right now, my sense right now is that most of the legislative energy that's available in the Senate is focused on the infrastructure bills. And so we may just have to wait a while they solve those issues before they come back to the voting rights bills. Is that helpful?
My husband's explaining more to me.
Oh, good. Maybe you should explain it all to us.
Well, I am unsure of some of the information that I believe to be true, so I don't want to start spreading that until I'm absolutely certain. So,
Okay.
So no.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions? So Arden.
I could talk more, but I thought I would pause and see if Anyone else wanted to pipe up? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation. And I'd like to take this opportunity to also thank all the members of the East Side Progressives that have helped to make this evening possible, from those who helped with the tech support with Zoom and the press releases and the website updates and the Facebook posts and sharing and whatnot. Thank you very, very much. And I want to remind everyone that we still are planning to have another forum later this fall on the school budget. We've decided to postpone it, but we are still hoping to offer that. So watch for that on our website or our Facebook site, and we'll do our best to advertise it as much as possible. And last of all, I wanted to put in a plug for an event that the Southwest Wisconsin Area Progressives and the Mount Horeb Troll group is putting on. They're sponsoring a documentary virtual screening of the documentary Can You Hear Us Now? It's a film made by Wisconsinites that details how gerrymandering is hurting Wisconsin voters. And it's going to be offered virtually from August 22nd through the 25th through Mount Horeb Area Fair Maps. And as soon as we get the link for that and how to register, we'll have that up on our website and on our Facebook site. We're really excited to see that movie. I know that I've been very interested in seeing it, and that people we had an earlier presenter this summer who talked to us from the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition, and she raved to me about this movie and how great it is. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to see it as well. So thank you, everyone. And for those of you that might want to share this discussion we've had, we'll be posting our recording on our website and sharing it out to all of you that have registered, so you can share it with your friends and neighbors and have people learn more about what we can do to combat voter suppression. So thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Arden. Thank you, Ingrid, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Arden. Thanks, Ingrid. It was really, really informative.
Thanks.